moving forward. Today's topic is called So You've Been in an Accident, Now What? And we're going to really kind of break this down into two broad points. The first is, what do you do at the scene of the accident? First, the driver, and then the home office. And we will also be talking about differences between smaller accidents, so-called fender benders, and also larger accidents that may even be catastrophic. The second sort of topic within the overall webinar today is, what do you do after the police have sent everyone home? What's the responsibility of the home office? What do you want to continue to monitor, to collect, etc.? So we're going to hear a lot of fantastic perspectives on best practices to make sure that your fleet does not have an accident turn into something that puts the organization at risk. And so I think it's a great lineup. And John, let me throw it over to you. Why don't you take about 30 seconds, tell everyone your title, what you do at Reliance, and how long you've been connected to this crazy industry called trucking.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to this inaugural monthly Trucking Matters webinar. We're going to have a lot of them. I think it's a great vision of Reliance Partners to get this information out. And I think you'll see after this call's over, you got two of the, the better DOT guys in the country, part of the Reliance Partners safety team. So my name's John Siedl. I used to be a state patrol inspector, so I pulled trucks over at the scales roadside for 12 years. Then I quit and became an investigator with the feds. So that dreaded conditional rating, unsat rating, hurt your loads, all that. I was the guy that issued those to companies, including fines and penalties. Then I became a hazmat agent with the FAA. So 23 years, state and federal government regulator, all in DOT compliance. So it's a resource that we think is unmatched in the industry when it comes to Reliance Partners. Now I'm part of the risk safety team at Reliance Partners. We do some consulting services. We help our companies control their risk profile. So what are we doing today? We're just covering one topic. We're going to try to share as much information as possible. I said I was a state patrol inspector. When I was a state patrol inspector at the scale, I worked side by side with this guy named Mark Barlar right here. So now Mark can introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Barlar. I'm a former master inspector with the Wisconsin State Patrol. Did 22 and a half years of doing DOT inspections. I conducted about 10,000 of them in my career. I was an instructor for FMC for hazardous materials inspection, cargo tank inspections, and was certified to do the Part A program, which is the first program that every new DOT officer needs to go through to become level 3 certified. I have investigated hundreds of crashes and conducted over 150 post-crash accidents in addition to just crash reports. At Reliance Partners here, I am the Director of DOT Regulatory Compliance, and I'm part of the safety team, and I help our clients out with understanding the regulations, training, and data queues.
So as you can see, everyone, we've got two fantastically qualified individuals. John, I want to start today's discussion with you. So let's say there's been more of a minor accident, and I know there can be a lot of degrees around that, but let's just start it off broadly. How much is time of the essence? What does the driver, he or she, who do they need to call? What other steps do they need to do at the scene of the accident? And should the driver wait for a trooper to arrive before he or she starts to take pictures, videos, sending GPS information? Let's just run with it from there.
Yeah, so this is going to be more like an open discussion kind of thing, right? So how we're going to do this little segment here is we're going to talk about minor incidents first and then kind of lead into more serious ones. Because Mark has all this experience being a patrol officer responding to crashes, I'm going to talk right now about what happens up until the point that Mark arrives to be the police officer at the scene to investigate the scene. So when you think about responding to a crash, a good truck driver doesn't know what to do because a good truck driver has no experience crashing. So when they get in one, they're like a fish out of water. They don't know how to handle it. You can train them all you want, but if they haven't had a crash for 10 years, you have to understand that as a safety director and not get frustrated with a good driver. I joke that the drivers that know how to handle crashes the best are the ones that crash all the time, but they're not the ones we want anyway. We want to prevent those crashes. So ultimately, it is the safety director dispatcher, operations that need to guide these drivers. So the crash happens. Every driver should immediately secure the scene. You should not have your vehicle left in a place where you could cause more harm than you already or has been caused by the crash itself. Don't leave your truck across traffic. Pull it off to the side. There's a stigma out there that you got to leave the vehicles exactly where they are. In some cases, that may be the case because you don't want to damage or hurt it. But in a lot of cases, get the trucker out of traffic so you don't cause more harm. So secure the scene. Then we got to get emergency services. We need the Mark Barlar State Patrol guys to get en route to handle this crash. You're not that person. So call 911. If there's injuries, you need to tend to those injuries. We got to be good Samaritans. You got to be a good human being and help people when they need that help. But if you've called 911 or 911's been called, Mark Barlar, the State Patrol guys en route, there are no major injuries securing the scene. The next thing you need to do is call dispatch, call your safety director, call your company. Because I said a good driver doesn't know what to do. Don't assume you know what to do. Who has handled most of the crashes at your company? The safety director in operations. You need to leverage their experience. Now, if you're a safety director, you get that call. You should remind them, secure the scene, call 911. Are you injured? Is anybody injured? Get that emergency services moving. But then a lot of safety directors make a mistake. They say, you know what? What happened? Is the cargo okay? They should immediately say, I don't even care what happened yet. You're going to have plenty of time to tell me that. You've secured the scene, emergency's coming. Go take photos, go take videos. The biggest problem is when the state patrol comes, they 9 times out of 10 will tell every driver, go sit in your truck, go stand over here. You can't run around the scene taking pictures and videos. You've lost an opportunity to gather that evidence for claims and litigation if you don't aggressively take hundreds of photos and videos. And it is our job to make sure the driver understands that. So they should go out and take photos of what? Everything. Even like if you think of a crash, when a crash happens, bystanders will pull their car over. They'll jump out and they will be like, is everybody okay? And when the scene settles before Barlar comes, some of those witnesses might disappear. Take pictures of their plates. Take pictures of their, of any tow truck that comes, any ambulance that comes, anything that comes, take pictures because we're going to need to follow up with that later. And you'll lose an opportunity to not take it later. If the cop comes and those witnesses are gone, they'll have no idea they were actually at the scene. So once you've taken all those videos, you've taken, information of people that might be witnesses that want to leave before the officer comes. Now the officer arrives and says, get in your vehicle. That's the time that dispatch can ask you your location. That's the time you can start the ball rolling on tow trucks and claims handling and getting your cargo secured, responding to the scene, finding out what happened, all of that. But now that we've done all those things with pictures and videos is the most important, now Mark Barlar arrives and he's going to explain here kind of how a standard crash is handled.
So normally when 911 is called, law enforcement gets dispatched out. They don't know exactly what is occurring at the scene other than what people have already called and told them about. And you got to remember, they're talking to a dispatcher who then dispatches it out to the inspectors, troopers, officers that are out on the road. So they're getting it third and fourth hand information. So now they're coming lights and sirens. Once they arrive on scene, what they want to do is they want to locate everybody that's involved. That's after they secure the scene themselves. So if our vehicle is in traffic, they're going to block off lanes of traffic. If they're on the shoulder, they're going to block off the shoulder. If there are injuries involved, they're going to start shutting lanes down next to the area where there's a crash at. But once the officer gets on scene, they need to evaluate. First thing is always preservation of life. They're going to go and locate everybody that's involved. And once they locate them, they assess for injuries. And then after that, they put them in a spot where they can find them later, right? So if you allow people just to keep moving around the scene, it's hard to locate people when you need more information. And when it comes to trucking, there's a lot of information that they're going to need from the driver about themselves, the load that they're hauling, if it's hazardous or not. So they're going to start, one, they're going to check on injuries. Two, they're going to put you in a place where you're going to be safe and they can locate you later. They're going to check on other people and they're going to call for more resources, and they're going to be on their radios quite a bit. A lot of things happen right away, and it seems like it only takes a few seconds, and when it actually takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it takes some time because of the adrenaline rush that's going to happen. Mindful that that officer is here to help. Listen to what they have to say, do what they have to say. And then there's things that once you get, then the officers will most likely tell them to go back to the vehicle, get them in their vehicle, because that's going to be the safest place for them. Once we are back in there and we've got all of our pictures done, there's some things that you can do to help yourself out. One, locate your binder that has your registration, your insurance information, and all of your ELD information, right? Because they're going to ask for that information if a DOT officer is there. On minor crashes, a DOT officer may never show up, so you never know. But on major crashes, they will most absolutely be called into the scene. And then there's a lot more that goes into it that we're going to explain a little bit later of what happens. Now, once the law enforcement arrives on scene, they secured it, they stabilized it. If ambulances arrive, then we know that somebody may be transported away, or they check to make sure that everybody is okay and nobody needs to be transported to the hospital. After that, tow operations begin. If you do not know of a tow operation in the area, what will happen is law enforcement will talk to their dispatchers and they say, get me next on the list, heavy haul tow for a vehicle weighing approximately this much. If it's 80,000 pounds, they're going to bring out a big record. If you're in the ditch line and they need to be winched out, they're going to probably bring a rotator to lift that vehicle's front end up and winch it out. Those cost a lot of money. We would rather have our own tow company that we like come out, because there's a lot of unscrupulous companies that are out there that will gouge companies out. Recent experience, $20,000 to get towed out of a ditch line, towed to a tow company to have the driver drive away. $20,000.
You know, to interject onto that too, Mark, there's two major things at a crash that can cost you a lot of money. And if you don't vet some relationships ahead of time, it could cause you big trouble. One is any kind of chemical spill or any kind of spill, and it doesn't have to be hazmat. If you got some liquid in your trailer, you roll in a ditch, it breaks open, the liquid goes into a waterway. You better have a pollution policy because it's not part of your truck. And when those companies come out to clean up a spill of some kind of contaminant into a waterway, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you don't have a pollution endorsement, you have no coverage. Same thing with tow. If you run regional, or you can get a national tow contract, if you be proactive and work out some tow arrangements with some national player, you might be able to get better deals in the long run than be stuck at the mercy of a tow company where you don't have any idea what they're going to charge you. I kind of equate it to like a hospital. We go to the hospital to get medical treatment. We have no idea what the doctor's going to charge us. And if we don't have good health coverage, we got a big bill coming. Same thing with insurance. The tow companies, they don't tell you what they're charging, and they charge you exorbitant amounts. And then we hope we have a full service towing policy, which Reliance could provide. Obviously, there's the plug to them. If you don't have unlimited towing within reason and it's capped out at a certain amount, you might end up with bills. So what Mark's saying is be proactive in these relationships with tow companies and any kind of spill cleanup companies, or you're going to regret it at the end for sure.
Other things that you're going to want to take into consideration is, what are you hauling? The officers are going to ask, especially if they see some type of material coming out of the trailer. They're going to ask, are you hauling hazmat? Whether or not you say yes or no, they're going to ask for the bills of lading. And when they see on the bill lating that there's possibly some hazardous materials, you're going to see a whole different response coming from that. They're going to start removing people from the scene. So absolutely know what you're hauling when you're doing that.
And one thing to interject about the hauling too, when you have a tow bill, towing is broken into the vehicle and the cargo. And sometimes when your physical damage insurance is not the same as your cargo insurance, they fight over how much they think they should pay. So if part of the tow company required picking the cargo up out of the ditch, putting it in a new trailer and hauling that trailer away, you could have a tow bill where a third of it should be associated to your cargo policy and 2/3 of it should be associated to your physical damage policy. Well, depending on the limits of each policy, that can make a difference. That's where these photos and videos are so important. You need to take a picture of what the cargo looks like after the accident happens so we can navigate the claim on the cargo/PD as it's associated with that tow bill too.
Now, as we start moving forward, we're okay. Everybody's okay. Tow has been called if they need to be called. The officer is starting to wrap things up. Things that we want to ask the officer, what is your name and what is a contact information that we can get so we can contact you directly? Do you have an email address that we can contact you with? Do you have a phone number that we can contact you with? If our vehicle is being towed, what's the name of the tow company and their direct phone number? These are things that we're going to want to know. How do I get a copy of the crash report? If it's a website, what is the website? All of this information is going to be needed by the motor carrier to retrieve the cargo, because they need to find out where it's going to be taken to get a copy of the crash report so they can give it to their insurance provider and then respond. If we get sued on top of that, we got a copy of the crash report. And then if it's an FMCSA recordable crash, then you absolutely have to get a copy of it, keep it, and then possibly do a data queue to even have removed because it was recorded as a reportable crash, but it's not through FMCSA's eyes, or through the crash preventability determination program, possibly having that point value removed so it doesn't affect your CSA scores.
And that happens after we're clearing the scene.
Yes.
Now, one thing you want to make sure you understand as it relates to crash reports, and Mark's going to interject on this, the officer grabs this information. Once he grabs the information, you have to wait for him to give you the crash report with the information we need to find out who towed it, where the trailer or truck might be, what is the name and policy number of the insurance company of whoever either hit us or we hit. Now, Mark, explain to them, in reality, being an officer, how long can it take for a crash report to get completed and submitted and available to somebody if they know where to go?
Ideally, it could be done that day, but normally not. If you're in a populated area, crash report may not be done for a week. If it is a major crash, it may be 6 months before you can get a copy of it. Now, most agencies and states have time limits on when crashes are submitted, except when there are extraordinary circumstances, bad weather, 100 vehicle pileup. Those crashes take time, right? So minor crashes should be done within a day or two. More involved crashes could take upwards of a week, especially in populated areas.
So now think about this. If a car hits us and we want to file a claim against the car and you don't figure out where that car is insured with their policy number and the name of the person and the plate on the car, we may not be able to file claim against the car's insurance until we get that crash report. That takes 2 or 3 weeks. You need to try before you leave. We're going to talk about what happens after you leave. You need to try to get the insurance information for the car involved, especially if it was their fault, because we don't want to have to wait to file a claim against the car to make us whole. We don't want our insurance company having losses that aren't even our fault. So if you don't get that information from them, from the officer before we clear the scene, you're at the mercy of however long that crash report takes. So you want that information. Another one is the tow company. You may know your vehicle got towed, but if the crash disconnects the GPS, you don't take a picture of who towed it, and that tow company doesn't send you a bill right away, you might be saying to yourself, where is our truck? Where is our trailer? And where is the cargo that we need to now navigate after the scene? take a photo of the tow company that arrives. If you can't see it because they told you to sit in your vehicle, you ask that officer who the tow company is, because that 2-3 weeks could incur extra storage fees, extra cargo issues. Maybe the customer isn't made whole, bad customer relations. So those are a couple key things you want to get and not wait for the crash report to obtain it.
Now, as John had talked about before, he said, take pictures, take a lot of pictures. And here's another reason why. Most law enforcement agencies are not required to take crash photos, not required to. So if they don't take any crash photos, who has it? We do, because we took a lot of them, right? At a minimum, I recommend 8, every corner and every side, all 4 corners, all 4 sides of every vehicle that's involved, if we can do that. Now, the best chance of you to be able to do that is before law enforcement arrives.
Correct.
Now, after law enforcement arrives and that tow company is there and they start hooking up to our vehicle, they're never going to hook up to that vehicle with you inside. So they're going to ask you to, hey, can you come out? That's the time where you want to get all your stuff out, because you may not get access to it for a while, right? So make sure you got your ELD. If you got your cell phone, if you need some clothes, your wallet, things of that nature. And when you get out of the truck, what's on the side of every semi-tractor that's out there? US DOT number and the name of the company. That's the same with the tow operator. They have to have their US DOT number and company name on the side of the truck. Take that picture, and then you can look up online the information on how to get in contact with them if they don't provide us anything else.
And talk about personal information. Think about claims handling. If the tow company is holding your truck, your trailer, and your cargo, and they're charging you way too much, and you want to negotiate that bill, but you've got information in the truck they won't let you pull out until you pay the bill. You don't want to give them anything hanging over your head where you can't negotiate a tow bill down. Anybody who immediately pays an exorbitant tow bill thinking they don't have the ability to try to negotiate it down by leveraging their insurance claim involving their insurance is making a mistake. Do they overcharge with tow in this country? Yes. Should you navigate and negotiate that? Yes, but don't give them any reason to hold it over your head. And then the other thing is, we do need to get the truck and the trailer out of there with the cargo as soon as possible. Storage fees for the truck and the trailer can pile up. Don't think your insurance company has your best interest at heart in every case because you file the claim. Well, they're taking care of it. No. Because they have a pile of them on their desk. And if they don't care enough to actively get your truck, trailer, and cargo out of there, your fees are going to go up. And if you don't have unlimited towing within reason, you're going to end up with a bill at the end of the day. Even if you have unlimited towing and storage fees within reason, you don't want your losses to go high. So you need to navigate that. And it's very important you get that tow company.
Now, some things to keep in mind with law enforcement, they're there to do a job. They are government workers. Their first priority at all times is the preservation of life, making sure that people are okay. Do they really care about your truck and your trailer? No. What they want to do is make sure everybody's okay, clear the scene after that, and then they write their crash report normally away from the scene. Now, once that vehicle is moved, it can be moved to multiple places. It could be moved to off-site to do an inspection on. It could be moved just to the tow yard. But once law enforcement, don't think that they're heartless, because they're putting their lives on the line to make sure that you're okay. But really about they no longer care about the motor carrier as a whole. They don't care about the equipment. They don't care about the load. So be aware of that. We've got to take care of our own, and you got to take care of your own equipment.
Now, Tom, before we transition to what happens behind the scenes at the company level when we're clearing the scene, because we're almost done clearing the scene with some of these tips. Some people will say, should I take a picture of the victim or the occupants of these other vehicles? If it's a gory crash and it's real bad injuries, the answer is absolutely not. But if you see people that are part of the crash and they grab diaper bags out of the back of their vehicle and whip the car seat out, and they're holding 2 babies and they're grabbing another kid by the hand, and you videotape that, when a lawsuit comes, they're going to say, yeah, at the scene, I could barely move. My back was hurt. Well, then you know what? We have at least a photo or a video of them more than capably running around, because you don't know. Now, again, if it's gory, if it's a bad injury, you're not going to be taking pictures of something like that. But I've had cases where we have come out victorious because the driver took photos of the occupants talking to the officer and walking down the thing. But don't walk them, follow them like paparazzi or anything. Just try to be nonchalant about it. But if it's a real bad crash, or even a crash you think might result in that, that's something you should do.
Now, when law enforcement is on scene and somebody complains that, ow, my neck hurts, they write down that it's an injury crash.
Yeah.
They don't assess how bad. That is not their job. They'll just write it down as an injury crash. Now, will that automatically show up on CSA? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the state and their crash report.
Yep. So for time, that's some of really good tips at the roadside. Now, Tom, we can transition to what happens behind the scene.
Well, before we transition, I've got a quick question. What should the driver not say? Most drivers are going to want to express some level of compassion, but from what I understand, it's not a good idea to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened, or I'm so sorry that, we caused this, or what should they say relative to making sure there's aid, and what should they absolutely not say? Mark, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, first thing, don't say I'm sorry, because you're kind of accepting blame at that point. You want to ask, are you hurt? Did you call 911? Things of that nature. You want to make sure that you're helping out and showing goodwill. Never admit to fault, and don't explain anything that you were doing to a driver or anyone else involved at the scene.
Yeah, the only people I say you should talk to at all about what happened is your company representatives. Be clear and tell them everything that you think happened at the scene, because on the back end, they need to capture all that for litigation later. Also, the officer, you should tell the officer the truth, but don't be talking to the officer, telling him the truth in the earshot of everybody else. If he's asking you questions as a professional, he should pull you aside more so than having a big powwow in the middle of the street with everybody saying what happened. And that's generally how they do it. So tell the officer your truth. Now, one tip, though, is if the officer says you were wrong and you know you weren't, and you have a camera in the vehicle, by all means, share the camera footage in the vehicle at the time of the crash with the officer. If he's trying to say it was you or you deviated from your lane, but your camera said it wasn't, because you want to defend yourself. You don't want a citation issued, and you do not want the crash report to say it was your fault and then later provide the video to the officer so he has to adjust his crash report and you have to go to court. Now, if he's not accusing you of any wrongdoing and it appears it's no issue, do not share camera footage with the officer. Do not share camera footage with anybody unless it will exonerate you at the scene. You let your company representative and claims handling and their attorneys start to share videos with people that ask for it later. Only give them what they ask for. Don't give them more unless it will benefit you and the company.
John, before we transition, another quick thought. Earlier, you mentioned that if there are witnesses or bystanders that happen to pull along, you said take a snapshot of their license plate.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, of course, is so many people will say, well, I don't want to get involved. Well, they may or may not be involved, but at least by having the picture of the license plate, if there's a need to reach out to that individual, you've got a way to do that.
And the officer can reach out to that witness if you think that witness is saying something different than the crash report. We'll give the plate to the officer. The officer can run the plate and find out who owns the vehicle and do his investigation he needs. Now, one step further, what's wrong with going to that witness that you know saw everything that will help you out later and ask them for their name and cell phone number? Ask them for any information so you can contact them later. A lot of these people stop because they want to help. So if you ask them for their help, 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you their name and cell number. Then you're not even having to worry about the officer running the plate and tracking the person down. You know exactly who it was, and you can call them yourself.
And do you all recommend sending the GPS location to your home office there, as opposed to saying I'm 15 to 20 miles west of Columbia, Missouri on Interstate
And
70.
I'll say one thing here. Every safety director on this call, every dispatcher, every operations person should exactly know how to grab this phone and go in on an Apple and a Samsung and know every click to send your location through your phone to the cell. A lot of these drivers are older. They don't even like using this phone. Some of them may even have a flip phone still, right? So you as a safety director have to say, go to the screen, push on this button, click on here, do this, hit your pin, send it to me, go in the text and walk them through it. If you can't do that to the driver, that's shame on you, safety person. And when should they send their ping? After they take the photos and the videos when they're sitting in their truck doing nothing. That's when you navigate them through the pin. Don't do it before the officer comes because you're wasting time.
That's great. So let's begin to transition to after the trooper has sent everyone home from the scene of the accident. What are some of the next steps, things to be aware of? John, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, so I'll put it in your lap.
Well, here's the thing. Claims, it doesn't matter if you did a DOT drug test usually, as long as an attorney isn't involved. But when it comes to any attorney getting involved, if you mess up DOT drug testing after a crash, you're in trouble, right? Now, you can't send them for DOT drug testing until they're released from the scene. So before you do anything, you need to determine whether or not post-accident DOT drug testing is available. And I'll tell you, people make mistakes all the time. Me and him answer these questions nonstop. Just because it's a DOT crash does not mean you do testing. A DOT crash is a fatality, injury treated away from the scene, or disabling damage requiring a tow. That's what the law says. Those three things: fatality, injury treated away from the scene, disabling damage requiring a tow. That's a DOT crash. You do not do testing for every DOT crash. You do not. You have to ask an additional question. Yes, we have a DOT crash. Now let's ask an additional question. If there's a fatality, was there a fatality? If the answer is yes, then you do DOT drug testing, period. Every fatality, drug testing, alcohol, and controlled substance. However, if it's injury treated away from the scene or disabling damage, you must ask your driver. You must ask them, did you receive a ticket for a moving violation associated to the crash? If our driver says, no, I did not receive a citation, then you do not do DOT drug testing for alcohol or drugs. If they received a citation, then you absolutely do the testing. So what should every safety director on this call do? The second the driver leaves the scene, ask him, did you receive a citation? If the driver says no, then you should say, if you get a citation, you need to call me immediately, because there is no excuse for not doing testing when it's a DOT crash and our driver gets a citation. Period, case closed. And then just so you get sick of listening to me, Mark will go through the timelines and what you need to do to make sure that on the back end, you're taking care of this once you determine a test is required.
Now, before we actually get into that, there's a couple of things here. How do we know if a car got towed away when we're sitting in our vehicle or somebody got transported away from the scene? A good indication that someone got transported away from the scene, if the ambulance leaves, they got their lights and sirens on.
Perfect.
Right?
Yep.
Then you know somebody's being transported to the hospital. Number two, if you see the tow truck going away with a vehicle on it, even though it may not be disabling damage, because we don't know exactly what that is, as long as the vehicle got pulled away on a tow truck, assume it's disabling damage and start that. Now, for alcohol testing, citation's got to be issued within 8 hours. For drug testing, it's within, a citation gets issued within 32 hours. Now, if those things happen, and it has to be for a moving violation that was associated with the crash, like speeding, following too closely, unsafe lane deviation, and God forbid, OW, yeah, you definitely need to do that. Now, if our driver gets taken to the hospital, how do we get that stuff done? Well, an officer might be getting it done for us. Here's the thing though, if we need contact information for the officer. If they're going to do the drug and alcohol testing, we got to ask, did you do alcohol? Did you do drug? Or did you do both? Normally, they will not do all of it, right? If they think that alcohol testing is needed, then they'll do that. Now, some states, not all states, but some states will require the officer to get drug and alcohol testing if they issue a citation. Now, that we don't know which states those are in. You might know it in your state, but you're 5 states away. How do we know unless we look it up and know where to look? We don't. So we need to ask these questions. Hey, are you guys testing our driver? Well, we don't know. Okay, did our driver get a citation? That's why it's imperative to get information about the officer who's investigating that crash. Get direct contact with them. Cell phone is best because there's things that they're going to want to ask you as well. Hey, what tow company do you want to use?
Yep.
So these are things that we need to keep in mind.
So drug testing. Can you use a police officer's test in lieu of a DOT test for post-accident? There's an interpretation in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations that say absolutely yes. So if law enforcement administers an alcohol and drug test, then you don't have to send them. The problem is it also says you need to get the result. If you don't have a driver that will cooperate, you as a trucking company under HIPAA laws, privacy laws for medical treatment, you're not going to get these results unless the driver, you're confident, will assist you in getting the results because it's their records. Very difficult to get the drug and alcohol records from an officer. Yes, you'll get credit for doing the test, but you'll get violated for not getting the result. So even if they test and you can still send them for a DOT test, you would want to send them yourself as well. But what if they're not able to get there within 8 hours for alcohol or 32 hours for drugs? Everybody on this call, every single time that you don't get the test done between 8 hours for alcohol and 32 hours for drugs, you need to grab a piece of paper with company letterhead and explain in detail all your attempts to get it done. And if you don't do that, they could violate you for not doing the test. A well-documented explanation as to why the test wasn't done when it qualified for testing within those timeframes will help you get out of a bad violation during a review when they knock on the door.
And one thing to keep in mind, if it's a fatality and not our fault, it happened to us, they ran into the back end and there's somebody that's deceased. We got to do drug and alcohol testing, correct? Not our fault. Can probably data queue it to get it off. Not if we don't have that information. Got to have drug and alcohol testing or provide an explanation why
100%.
that was not able to get done.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys are covering some great information. Audra, do you have any good questions you want to share? A couple of questions here.
We'll just go into questions first and then interject.
There's one question. What do you do when the police report has been changed and a second report has conflicting info from the first one?
Great question.
Right. So when this happens actually quite a bit, I mean, other information gets brought in, they use the wrong US DOT number. There's conflicting information. You have to get the most current one. If it has been changed by the officer, that's because they needed to make a correction. Most crash reports in most agencies, the officer that's on scene writes the crash report and then it gets reviewed by a supervisor. And if a change needs to be made or something later happens, let's say crash happens, serious injuries, they write the crash report, and then 20 days later, a person succumbs to their wounds that were sustained during the crash. That's going to turn into a fatal crash at that point. Okay, there are time periods in every state that says it turns into a fatal crash if somebody passes away within a certain time period because of injuries that they sustained during that. The crash report's already written. Now they got to go back in and amend it. So we have to get the next one. We have to get it.
Now, I had said before, if you have evidence at the scene that will exonerate you, like a camera footage or one of those witnesses that may have left and you got their cell number, please communicate that to the officer so you don't have to try to get them to amend a crash report later and then it looks real sloppy because you used the most current one. So absolutely try to be proactive at the scene, but if it doesn't happen and we have evidence later, everybody can petition 2 officers with additional information and have them amend a crash report for the purposes of claims and or litigation. Absolutely 100%. What's worked for me too is if they're reluctant to change the crash report, have the officer send you an email from their official email and say, I know the crash report says this, but after getting further information, this is actually what I now think happened. It's a very unprofessional way for the officer to do it, but some of them will take the easy way out and do that, especially if it's in relation to a data queue that we might be able to submit.
Yeah, and the reason for that is not every officer is a DOT certified officer.
Correct.
Any officer within the United States can write a crash report and it can show up on our profile. So, and some officers don't get a whole lot of training. They might get a few hours of training in the academy, and that's the last thing that they receive for 10 years because they work at a smaller agency that can't afford all this type of training, and the ongoing training that they needed, crashes weren't a part of it. So that could be it also. Just keep these things in mind. Not every officer that writes a crash is also an expert on crashes because they might only write a couple of crashes a year. Just be mindful of that. Now, I do want to offer up a couple more tips for our drivers that are out there right now and for our safety personnel. These are for major crashes, okay? We have a major crash, fatalities, major injuries, a lot of vehicles, a lot of property damage. Please do not use an ELD that's on your cell phone, because what happens at that point, the officer can seize your cell phone and keep it for evidence. Always have a tablet or a different cell phone to run your ELD on. That way you always have your cell phone. What happens at a crash scene when something major and there might be some criminal stuff going on? Then the officer starts seizing stuff and you won't get it back. So when you don't have your phone as your ELD, have a separate tablet, have another phone that you only use dedicated to that ELD. So if they do seize it, you still have a way to communicate with everybody, because realistically, our phone is our lives nowadays, it seems like. Another thing is, once you get out of that vehicle, when it's going to be towed, you may not get back into it for months, right? So take what you need. The officer might be there to say, okay, take this, and take that. Ask. If they don't let you get back in, ask to get back in. Say, can I get some of my personal effects? Because you may not see it for months. Once a vehicle gets impounded because it's a fatality or serious injuries, it's the government that releases your vehicle at that point, and they don't care about your feelings. They don't care about your, it's costing a lot of money. They care about the law, and that's it.
We have a comment from a listener who shares that I recommend following the tow company to the tow yard with your equipment. That may not always be physically possible if the driver's been injured, but a noteworthy point there. I know there's still,
a lot of times the tow company will allow the driver to ride in the vehicle with them.
Okay.
That's a lot.
There's a lot of other little topics here that I want to make sure at least we give cursory attention to. Let's say it is an accident where the possibility exists that the driver had some fault. At what point should counsel be brought in so that whatever the driver, he or she shares, then becomes protected, privileged information because the motor carrier brought in legal counsel?
Well, I'll tell you, the legal counsel has to work this way. If you are written by a really good auto liability insurance market, they all have very good legal counsel. So you'd want to submit that claim to your auto liability market as soon as possible. And when you submit it through the claims, you have to star and openly communicate. This appears to be our fault. It is a larger severe accident. Please send this in with high priority. A good market will get their counsel involved very early, and you won't have to pay for it. It's part of your insurance policy. So would I run out and hire counsel right away? Well, I would if I'm in a really crappy auto liability provider that doesn't have the service available to help me with that. Then you may need to, which means you bought a very inexpensive policy to save money in a trying market. We all get it. But if you're with a really good market, they'll have legal advice on staff. So let the insurance company aggressively attack those bad crashes. What do we do on the back end? I used to be an investigator with FMCSA. I'm now an expert witness in a lot of cases, depositions, defending trucking companies with a lot of the markets we work with. I will tell you right now, you need to do a mini compliance review of every single piece of the compliance for that driver. You need to do a full review of their logs, not for today and the previous 7 days, but upwards of 30 days or even 6 months. You need to look at the maintenance on the truck, the trailer, their drug testing, go back through their DQ file, make sure that every T is crossed, every I is dotted. And a lot of people will say, well, I didn't get a lawsuit for 2 years or a year and a half. I only have to keep logs for 6 months. They're gone. Nuh-uh. These attorneys have case law where it says if you don't proactively retain these items that you feel it's more likely than not could result in litigation, you could be deemed at fault for hiding or getting rid of evidence as it relates to discovery in a court case. You don't want that. Every attorney will tell you, if there's any thought that there's going to be a lawsuit, preserve all that mock review evidence way past the retention period required in the regulations.
Now, you're going to get a real good idea of how serious this is after a couple of days after the crash occurs, right? Because you're going to start getting phone calls from law enforcement asking for driver qualification files, hours of service. If they ask for more than just that day in the previous 8 days, and they're asking for 30 days, 60 days, you know that something else is going on. You're required to provide it. So be aware that when they start asking those types of questions, they're looking at our driver being at fault and possibly going further. Now, when we're talking about litigation and whatnot, if we can no longer contact our driver, right, and they didn't go to the hospital, they're probably in handcuffs somewhere. And at that point, stop talking. Only provide your name and the information you're required to. Stop talking. Get a lawyer to them to protect everything involved.
But if your driver is even remotely at fault, and as minor as you think this injury may be to this person, you have no idea that after they drove away from the scene, a billboard attorney called them, told them to go to the hospital. The hospital wrote up a report that they now have a strain in their neck and they need neck surgery or whatever it may be. As minor as you think it is, you could get sued a year and a half later and you'll almost fall out of your chair and realize, oh, I can't even believe this happened, right? Have that mock review done. It doesn't hurt your company do a little mock review of every crash, because what you're also doing is doing a mock review of your company if there wasn't a crash. So it's an excuse to continue to do little compliance reviews at your company to make sure your safety staff are doing everything right with all of those items we mentioned. Why just do a mock review when there isn't a crash? Do it every time there's a crash. Dig deep into that driver's history.
And if you don't think that a lawyer is going to contact the other people involved, there are law firms out there in your area that send out a letter every week to every law enforcement agency saying, send me your list of crashes and who is involved. And then they send letters to those people that are involved, no matter what, without even reading the crash report. This absolutely happens. It happened at my agency, the Wisconsin State Patrol. So you know it's happening everywhere.
We have another listener comment or question. What happens when the driver got into an accident involving a fatality or an injury, but he or she is also at the hospital injured? How can the drug test be administered to that driver when they're hospitalized?
That goes into the piece of paper I said. You are required to fill out in writing and document why you didn't do the test within the timeframes. And now to get into the weeds a little bit, alcohol is actually 2 hours. It says if the crash happens at noon and you don't do an alcohol test by 2 p.m., you got to start typing in. So what would you say? Crash happened at noon. Driver was taken to the hospital. I called the hospital. I talked to Susie. She said they don't do DOT testing. I asked if the cop was doing it, and she says it's none of my business. I called at the 6th hour, the 7th hour, the 8th hour, and the driver was not released from the hospital until the 10th hour.
Documented.
Well, then you document between noon and 10 p.m. There was no availability to do the test, but you better type all that out. And you better put Susie's name in there with the cell number and timestamp. Take screenshots of your phone that you called. Go crazy in documenting your little mini case to show that you did everything you could do under good faith. Now, if they get released at 10 o'clock, now you still have time to do the drug test. So you got to get them to a facility and do that within 32 hours. Now, if they're in the hospital for 2 days and you call the hospital and they say, we have no availability. Well, can I bring in a mobile unit? No, you can't. Are you crazy? You find that Susie said no, and you document that and you say, Susie, they may call you and you better remember that you said no. Perfect. Then he gets released 2 days later. Then you document that you couldn't do it and you don't even try. This 2 hour to 8 for alcohol and 32 hours is very important to document, or you're going to get violated when they come knock on your door.
Guys, what about the role of social media? Can be friend or foe. Let's say the driver does suspect that the party in the vehicle had some sort of an injury, or he knows for a fact that that person was taken to a hospital. What sort of things should the motor carrier potentially be looking at on social media?
What I would do is it goes back to having a good auto liability market. A good auto liability market that's afraid of a lawsuit will not only involve their attorneys, they will hire surveillance companies to surveil the activities of those drivers. Not only social media, but they'll follow them around to the ski hills or UTVing or wherever. But if you don't have a good market that's doing that, and you call your claim adjuster and like, hey, can I get some surveillance? And the market says, we don't do that. Well, then you may either need to be your own surveillance, or you need to hire a third-party entity to surveil this person on your behalf. There's companies out there. But I would tell you, attorney, surveillance, tracking social media, go to your market first. Talk to your claim adjuster. Have direct conversations and say, what are you going to do to help me out? I don't want to throw good markets in here, but like Travelers Cargo is probably an Allianz. Those are two major cargo players that are so good at assisting you in investigating things on that level. We can go on and on about good markets, and then we can go on and on about ones that aren't so good. And what I would say is the ones that aren't so good are the ones when you're out there looking for the cheapest rate you can possibly find every single renewal.
And my opinion on that is stay off of it for us, and tell our drivers to do it. I tell my kids all the time,
Yeah.
Social media only hurts, it never helps.
Well, and we talked about an example of a witness or a bystander who pulls in. You never know if they're going to put something on Twitter, Instagram, especially if there's been damage where things fell down into the ditch, as you described. So I think that's great advice, John. Make sure you've got a quality underwriter that has the tools and staff to help you fight whatever's coming. Let me ask another question. Should motor carriers automatically assume there's a high risk of eventual litigation, regardless of whether it was a fender bender or something much more significant? Should the default mode be that mindset, if for no other reason that they're going to continue to review processes and things that you described a little while ago? What do you guys think about that?
I'm going to ask Mark a question so he can answer this. Mark, I know you weren't guilty of this, but are there officers that are out there that feel empathy for the car who got hit, and they look at the trucking company and say, well, it's a trucking company. So whenever it's questionable as to who's at fault, even the officers themselves sometimes side with the car driver over the motor carrier. Have you ever seen that?
It happens. It is absolutely true. And we also have to understand on the more serious crashes, if a post-crash inspection is done, we may think that we have everything was top notch on our vehicles, and come to find out we were deficient on some of our lighting or some of our reflective materials on the vehicle. And let's say that maybe it was a side impact and we didn't have the retroreflective sheeting and our light was out at that point. And we had a through highway, but somebody goes through a stop sign and runs into us. Now we would think that, hey, we didn't do anything wrong, but a lawyer is going to seize on the fact that, hey, your vehicle maintenance isn't what it should be. The whole reason to have that retroreflective sheeting on the side of the trailer is so if a light does go out, their headlights are going to illuminate. It's going to be nice and bright and alert them that this is how long the vehicle is. And they go underneath it for whatever reason.
Yep.
Lawyers will seize on whatever they can that the motor carrier has done wrong.
And if you think of it
for
this way,
case.
some officers, and everybody's experienced it on this call. How did the officer come to that conclusion? It's because you're a truck and you hurt this little car. That's why. Their mindset is that. Now, I'm not saying all officers, but it's out there. If that's the mindset of police officers who are supposed to be 100% professional, imagine what 12 jurors think when you get to court on a lawsuit. The big truck smashed into this old lady with her husband and injured them after a whole life of fruitful happiness, right? There are people like, yeah, that could happen to me, you big bad trucker. So I will tell you right now that you should always assume that you could end up in front of 12 jurors that are going into it with a little bias against the big bad trucker. And you should treat the behind the scenes mock review, the drug testing, the equipment, your CSA scores, all of those can play a negative light into a lawsuit.
Other thing to consider is especially for major crashes where your vehicle gets impounded. We want to get people out there as soon as we can to observe their post-crash inspection if we can. And if they will allow you to, do your own inspection of the vehicle. Hire experts to get it done for you.
I got to say one thing about post-crash too, Tom. And I get this call every week, and I know Mark does too. If you get an inspection after a crash, please look at your inspection report. There's a column that says crash. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. For whatever reason, and whatever it is, FMCSA wants to know what defects were caused by the crash and which ones they believe were there before the crash. So on every post-crash, you're going to see a column crash. If it says yes, that means it was part of the crash, that violation, and it will not hurt your scores. And you can articulate to the claim adjuster that that wasn't in violation before the crash. The why means it happened during the crash. If it says no, they're trying to say that that violation was pre-crash. So when you get an inspection report, look down that column, yes, no, yes, no. If you believe they made a mistake and they're trying to say that no, it wasn't the result of the crash and you believe it was, you can data queue that and say, listen, later in a lawsuit, they may come back and say, you had 6 violations that were pre-crash when you and I know they were the result of the crash. So definitely look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's a big deal because if they're not listing as things as being happening because of the crash. So if we get rear-ended and both their taillights smashed out, directional smashed out, if it doesn't have that Y in that underneath that crash column, that means it's going on to our CSA profile. And how do you get it off? You contract with Reliance Partners and get insurance for us, and we help you out.
Hey guys, when there has been an accident of a certain size, it's natural that the local media is going to want to cover it. They may call the trucking company and ask for some comment. Why is no comment really not a good answer? And what might you suggest that motor carrier spokesperson say to the local news investigator?
Now, my thoughts on this is no comment means, what are you guys hiding? Right. So what I would say to the news would be, hey, we're looking after our driver and the equipment and everybody that's involved. We're making sure everybody is getting the care that they're needing. And that's what we're focused on at this time.
It's never hard. It's never bad to just make a statement of empathy, right? We hope everybody that may have had a problem here ends up good in the end. We're praying for everybody. Everyone's in our thoughts. Making statements of empathy like that are fine without admitting guilt. Don't speak any facts. And if anything, you say, we're obtaining information. We don't know what the circumstances were surrounding this crash. So at this time, it would be irresponsible to comment.
Guys, we're about out of time here. I want to remind the audience, this was season 1, episode 1 of a new series called Safety Matters. And Safety Matters maybe doesn't capture everything. Sometimes it's going to be regulatory issues or just hot button issues. So for example, my president, Chad Eichelberger, we're talking about addressing the subject of double brokering, trailer theft, the stealing of motor carrier numbers. There's a whole cottage industry of destruction going on right now. We've got a great lineup of topics coming. In the next several days, we'll be announcing episode 2. So look for that. We want to thank everyone for their participation. Guys, I really enjoy every time I converse with you, even though this wasn't a normal conversation, just listening to the wisdom you guys have to share. It's really compelling. And I'm really fortunate that I'm on the same team with you guys. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today as well. And look for an announcement soon on episode 2.
All right. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everybody.
I appreciate it.